What's up guys, Sagi here and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. Today we're going to check out the Sony A7iii, and this thing is an absolute beast. I'm going to walk you through a review and my decision making process about whether I want to keep this camera or not. Now, the A7iii is being talked about as an entry-level or basic full-frame mirrorless camera, but honestly it's a ridiculously nice camera. I traditionally shoot Canon, but I've used tons of cameras from other brands, and this one is one of the most impressive ones I've ever used. I'm going to cover what I liked and what I didn't like about the A7iii, and there's a specific thing about it that I think it's critical that you know either before you buy this camera or even if you already own it. I'm going to very quickly go over some of the overall key features in case you're just starting your research. So the A7iii has a really nice weather-sealed magnesium alloy body. It has a 24 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor and uses 639-point hybrid autofocus system. Now, Sony opted for the BIOS X image processor, which is outstanding and helps with operating speed and performance, as well as the excellent overall image quality. It has a 3-inch tilt LCD screen and can internally record 4K 30 at 420 or externally at 422. There's a decent 2.36 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder, and it can shoot continuously at up to 10 frames per second. Has a crazy expandable ISO of up to 204,800, and finally a feature that I'm really looking forward to testing out is the 5-axis in-body image stabilization. Now, the A7iii is of course an updated version of the A7 II, and from what I can see so far, it's an upgrade in virtually every way. The new sensor is better both in bright and low light, and the autofocus system is significantly better. But like I said, it's not perfect, so let's talk about the good and the bad and see if this is a good fit. Let's start out by talking about the sensor and the processor. And the A7iii has a 24 megapixel full frame BSI sensor and the BIOS X image processor. If I'm comparing it to another one of my favorite cameras from 2018, the Fuji X-T3, that camera comes with a 26.1 megapixel sensor, but it's an APS-C sensor. So going back to the A7iii, without getting into the nerdiness of BSI or backside illuminated, sometimes you'll hear it called BI or back illuminated, it basically means that some of the elements were moved to the back of the sensor with the goal being better low light performance. I'm going to tell you that from day one of using this camera, I was super impressed by how well it performs in low light. And that was right out of the box. I wasn't changing any settings or using a picture profile that I specifically set up for low light. I'll be publishing a tutorial which covers the exact custom settings that I use when shooting in low light, and there's a little bit of setup involved, but it takes a few minutes, and then once you have it done, you're golden. But going back to what I was saying, this would really only be optimizing the already incredible low light capabilities of the A7iii. So this full frame sensor is an excellent option if you're shooting portraits, landscape, events, weddings, and even sports and street photography. Plus, if you're just doing family and lifestyle photography and video, and you want outstanding results, you're not going to be disappointed with this sensor. Now, I mentioned video, and this was one of the main reasons why I chose this camera. And with what I've seen so far for 4K video, it definitely challenges cameras like the Panasonic GH5 and the Fuji X-T3. I'll get into this more in a later section, but it's going to give you beautiful crisp 4K video with improved color science. Now, the Sony color is something that some people like and some people don't. To me, it seems to have a bit of a greenish tint, which I normally just adjust in post. But with the A7iii, I definitely see an improvement as far as color science goes if I compare it to something like the A6500. Alright, so that was the sensor. Let's talk a little bit about the processor. Now, Sony went with the BIOS X processor, which together with front-end LSI results in faster processing time and the ability to capture 15 stops of dynamic range in low ISO values. And you're going to notice this when you go outside and try to shoot in very challenging conditions. So when you're shooting in situations where there's a significant discrepancy between the brightest and the darkest parts of your scene, this is going to be able to handle it a lot better than a sensor with a more limited dynamic range. Together with a nice sensor, you're going to get sharper images and video and really nice low light performance. And the BIONZ X also makes the camera really fast to operate, so the A7 III is pretty responsive for both photography and stills. General menu operation is fast, has a very quick startup, and things like image preview and video playback again are very fast. For photography, it can shoot at up to 10 frames per second burst or continuous shooting with continuous autofocus. So I can just hold down the shutter and the camera will just keep firing. Now this is a nice feature if you're photographing kids or pets running around, if you're at a sporting event, or anytime where you're shooting a fast-moving subject. And we'll talk about this a little more later, but the continuous autofocus during burst shooting is really impressive. From a video standpoint, the A7 III can record internally up to 4K 30/420 8-bit video or 4K 30/422 externally. One of the most important things for me with any tool that I use is ergonomics, and I don't know why more people don't talk about it. So the A7 III is both bigger and heavier than the A7 II, but it's definitely on the smaller side when you consider it's a full frame sensor camera. The grip is nice and deep and it's super comfortable to hold, and for my hand, it's just tall enough so that I don't feel like I need a grip, but I wouldn't mind using it with a grip. What's cool about the grip for the A7 III is that if you own another body like the A7R III or the A9, the grip works on all three bodies, which is kind of a bonus. And the grip holds 2 batteries, so now you're really shooting forever. And the body has a magnesium alloy chassis, and the weather sealing makes the A7 III dust and moisture resistant. I've only had it for about a month, so I don't know how it's going to hold up long term, but so far it's been pretty good. The A7 III uses the new NPFZ battery, which is also used on the A7R III and the A9, and it's amazing. You might think it's a battery, who cares, I'll just go and bring an extra battery, which is totally true, except that it's nice not to have to. And this battery is rated for something like 710 shots, and using it just feels like it lasts forever. Now, Sony doesn't include a charger, which is just more of an annoyance, and you have to use either a micro USB or a USB-C cable to charge it. Or you, of course, can go buy a charger. Now, from my perspective, if you're buying a $2,000 body, it should come with a charger, and I didn't even think about it. I got an extra battery like I always do, and I don't really use it because I have to take one battery out of the camera and put the other one in order to charge it. Luckily, like I said, the battery lasts forever, but come on Sony, throw in a charger. A really nice feature is that I can use the A7 III if it's plugged in, which is awesome when I'm shooting video for a long time, or even if I'm streaming, and then I don't have to worry about the battery life at all. Now, as far as buttons and dials, this is definitely one of the strengths of the A7 III. I think that if you're buying a camera and you're just using it with the factory settings, you're really missing out. Part of what you get when you're buying a higher end camera is the ability to customize it to work better for exactly how you shoot. I have a follow-up video coming where I'll show exactly how I set up every button on the A7 III. And I suggest that you check it out when it's published, and even if you don't end up doing everything that I did, it might give you some pretty good ideas and you can just pick whatever works best for you. Now, on the right side, we have a little barn door with dual SD cards, which is phenomenal. Now, you can of course either use them in sequence so that the camera goes to card 2 after card 1 is full, or what I recommend is that you have them mirrored so that you can have an immediate backup. This is super important when I do client work where immediately after the shoot, we just split up the cards so 2 different people keep one of each copy so that if anything is lost or damaged, we immediately have a backup. Now, only one of these slots is rated for the faster UHS 2, which is kind of strange, and I don't know, maybe Sony was just saving money. That part's kind of weird. Now, something that happened to me, which I never experienced with any other camera before, is that when I was using a Lexar Professional SDXC UHS 2 card, the A7 III wasn't able to read it, and then I was getting an error on the screen. It didn't work in either slots, and I formatted it in the camera and then it worked, but first it only worked in slot 2 and then in slot 1, and then it was really inconsistent, and I don't know if there's a compatibility issue with this particular card type. I also know that there are issues with the camera, and some SanDisk cards. So hopefully this is something that Sony can take care of with a firmware update. If anyone watching this has had the same experience or any feedback about that, I'd be super interested in reading your comments. Now, my older SanDisk cards worked great. Now, assuming they were using cards that work in both slots, it's really nice to have two of them, and I'm looking right at you, Canon EOS R. The viewfinder is good, but not great. It's a 2.36 million dot EVF. If I'm comparing it to something like the EOS R, which has a 3.69 dot EVF, then it's obviously not as sharp. Now, Sony kept their higher resolution 3.68 million dot EVF for the Sony A7iii and the A9, which makes sense to me. They need to be able to offer increased value in their higher end models, or otherwise nobody would buy them. I talked already about how amazing this camera is as far as the ability to customize the buttons. What's not amazing is the menu system. And it's not the menu design that I found problematic. It's actually super easy to use. It's split into categories that make sense, and you can clearly see what page you're on, and you can navigate up to the top level and move from one category to the next without having to scroll right through every page. So that part of it is actually well done. The issue is that it seems disorganized, which led to a lot of confusions, and features and settings just aren't where I expect them to be, and they're not sorted in the order that I would expect based on importance. And I've shot with many other Sony cameras, and this seems to be my general impression. I'm gonna go back and say that from an actual usability standpoint, it's easy to navigate and move around. And if you know exactly where something is, then you'll find it right away. But otherwise, expect to go hunting for a bit. And I'll post a few tutorials that will show you how to customize the settings. And the good thing is that because of how many buttons there are, once you get these set up to do what you want them to, you very rarely interact with the menu. All right, next I want to talk about resolution, frame rates, and image quality. Now for stills, the A7 III has a maximum resolution of 6000 by 4000, which is more than what most people would ever need unless you're planning on printing something huge. It can of course shoot in both JPEG and RAW, so you can decide just how much information you want to capture depending on what you plan to do with these images in post. Now, the image quality for stills is phenomenal. The images are tack sharp with fantastic dynamic range. It has some of the best JPEG noise reduction I've seen on any camera, and the Sony colors are improving, especially for skin tones. It still has that Sony look, which I happen to like, but if you're coming from Canon, it's gonna look slightly cool to you, and you might find that the blues or greens are slightly boosted. There's definitely some personal preference there, and I'm just sharing my impressions. And of course, any of this can be easily worked out in post. Now for video, the A7 III can record 4K at up to 30 frames per second and Full HD or 1080p at 24, 30, 60, and 120 frames per second. It can record 4K 30 at 4208 8-bit internally, and it can record 4K 30 4228 8-bit with the HDMI out. Both of them are at 100 megabits per second. Now, depending on how much I graded the footage, I didn't always find recording externally to be a meaningful enough difference to justify the larger setup. As far as frame rates go, this isn't exactly leading the pack. We have the GH5, the Fuji X-T3, and even the Nikon Z6 and Z7 offer higher bit and frame rates. And I can't even mention Canon because, you know, Canon. Now, of course, that's assuming that all other things are equal, which we know that they're not, but I'll leave that to the comparison video. All right, a little nerd talk here. If you're shooting 4K 24 frames per second, then the footage is oversampled from 6K, which renders incredible detail. Like seriously, 4K footage from this camera is absolutely stunning. We're using the full width of the sensor and there's no pixel binning. If you're shooting 4K 30, then the footage is oversampled from 5K and there's a 1.2 crop factor. Now, depending on how much of a pixel peeper you are, you could notice a difference between the quality of 24 and 30 frames per second, but honestly, it's so good that I don't even think about it. Now, going to Full HD or 1080p, we have a lot more options. You can shoot at 24, 30, 60, and 120 frames per second. Now, 24, 30, and 60 offer two different bit rates, so just choose the higher one for the best quality. Now, let's get to 120 frames per second, which is one of the reasons why someone who was previously shooting on Canon, is using a Sony camera. I love slow motion. I do, I can't help it. And I'm so happy with the slow mode that I'm getting from this camera. The autofocus works really well, and I'm super happy with the quality. There's also a video option called S&Q, which, if you're not familiar with, allows you to select frame rates ranging from 1 to 120 frames per second. The camera then either slows down or speeds it up to either 24 or 30 frames per second, whatever you want. So if you're using S&Q 120 frames per second, and you shoot a clip and then you watch it in the camera or on your computer, it's already slowed down. Now, personally, I prefer to shoot at 1080p 120 and then slow it down in post because I think the quality is a little better. Now, you can also use this feature to shoot a fairly limited time lapse, meaning the slowest that you could shoot is 1 frame per second. So it's not great, but Sony doesn't offer a dedicated in-body time lapse feature, and they removed most of the functionality from the Playmemories app. So if you're in a bind, it is what it is. You can't really drag the shutter, and like I said, the slowest interval is 1 second. But again, when you're in a bind, you gotta use what you have. All right, next let's talk about autofocus. And one of the reasons I've been hesitant to use Sony cameras is that I haven't had the best experience when it comes to continuous autofocus for video. Previously, for stills, the Sony AF has been good, but for video, the continuous autofocus, it would just hunt and it was inconsistent. I just couldn't use it. Well, the A7 III has a new autofocus system, which is essentially the same system implemented in the much more expensive A9. And it uses 639 phase detection autofocus points, which cover 93% of the sensor. So if you think about that, that's pretty incredible. Let's start with photos. So for photography, the focus is very fast, and that's both when I'm using Sony lenses or Canon or Sigma with the Sigma MC11 adapter. I mostly used continuous autofocus in flexible spot, and I used a joystick to control the focus zone. And this was super reliable. It worked really well for me, even in low light. Now, the eye detection autofocus is insane with this camera. It's so good. Like, basically, I have it mapped to one of the buttons, so I can just hold it down, and it's killer. I was most surprised that it worked even when the person was wearing glasses. And I love the green marker. You can't miss it, and if it doesn't find the eye, then it's just gonna default back to face detection. So again, it was good and fast, both with the Sony lenses and the adapted Canon and Sigma lenses. And really, the only time the eye detection failed me was when the subject was backlit and in low light, at which point it just reverted back to face detection. And I'm not really ever shooting like that, but I just wanted to see how far I can push it. For video, I noticed a significant improvement over the previous Sony cameras that I used. Sony has pretty confusing focus settings, and there's a lot of them. And at first glance, there seems to be a lot of confusing overlap. But once you dive deeper into each setting and dial down to the one that you want for a particular situation, it works really well. I'm going to do a follow-up video dedicated just to autofocus because I think there's just so much to cover, but coming from Canon, which I still think has my favorite autofocus for video, this is the first time where I looked at a Sony camera and I was pretty impressed. Like, for example, I really like the flexibility of being able to control how much of a change the camera needs to detect before shifting focus. And then on top of that, having control over how fast or slow it's gonna rack focus. So moving to video, the Sony autofocus is good. And with subject tracking, I really enjoyed using it. Face detection for video is pretty good as long as there is decent light, but there are some strange limitations. Like, for example, if you use an external monitor because there is no fully articulating screen and you're shooting in 4K, you might find that your face detection doesn't work. Now, for some reason, Sony disabled this feature for both 4K 24 and 4K 30, which is super frustrating. Now, that's if you're just using the monitor to monitor. If you disable the internal recording and you use an external recorder with a monitor, then face detection will turn back on. So if you need a monitor and you need face detection, you have to also record externally, And this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it is what it is. Now there's one thing I wanted to tell you about, has to do with using adapted lenses. Like I said before, I used the Sigma MC11 adapter, which worked beautifully for me with both my Canon L series glass and my Canon mount Sigma lenses, as long as I was shooting stills. Autofocus was extremely fast and the images were super sharp. Now, if you have Canon or Sigma lenses and you're a photographer, I definitely recommend using the Sigma MC11 adapter. The problem was when I tried using them for video. And in that case, only the Sigma lenses were able to use continuous autofocus. Now, I've read that you can kind of get it to work with the Metabones Mark V, but with pretty inconsistent results. And honestly, for me, if I can't count on it working all the time, I'm just gonna use manual focus. Now, of course, this doesn't matter if you're using Sony lenses, but I thought it was important so that you don't buy this camera and expect it to do something that it won't. So to recap my opinions about autofocus for stills, it's fantastic with all the lenses that I used. And for video, it's much better if you're using either Sony lenses or Sigma lenses. All right, let's move on to lens options. And I think a lot of people forget to look at this part when they shop for a camera. When I test cameras, I like to use a variety of lenses at different price points so I can help people get a true feel of what they should expect. So I use the Sony 28-70, 3.5 to 5.6, which comes with optical image stabilization. Now this is an inexpensive lens and I found that for the price, it did pretty good. It's not going to compete with my L series Canon glass, and of course it's not a constant aperture and it's not a very fast lens, but again, as a function of price, I think it's a good value. Now Sony lenses are a bit of a touchy subject for some people, and it's not a matter of quality, it's a matter of cost. If you're looking at the GM lenses, you're looking at incredible glass, but expect to spend some serious cash for it. For a quick comparison, the Sony GM70-200 2.8 is $2,600. And when I compare it to the Canon L series 70-200, even the Mark III costs $2,100. So we're looking at an extra $500 there. Now, if we're looking at the 24-70 2.8, it's $2,200. The Canon is usually $1,900, although right now it seems to be on sale for $1,700. So you're either looking at $500 or a $300 difference. And this goes on and on. So for me, if I'm shooting professionally, this difference isn't super significant. I know it's like $500 here and $300 there, and they add up, but I know this coming in and I would build that cost into my business plan. This would also be a tool that I would use all the time, and I don't mind investing in it. But I think that it should be part of your decision-making process when you're choosing a system, just so you have an idea of your overall cost. So to revisit, Sony has an outstanding selection of premium lenses at a premium price. Now, Sigma has also announced that they're going to start making 9 of their Art Series prime lenses for the E-mount. That's gonna make a lot of people happy. And unfortunately, they haven't said anything about zoom lenses yet, but I'm telling you it's coming. Let's talk a little bit about the screen. And the A7 III has a 3-inch tilting touchscreen-ish LCD. And let's start with the tilt. So you can tilt it up to 107 degrees, which is really good when you're shooting from the hip or anytime where you're above the camera. And you can tilt it down, but only to about 41 degrees, which is a little frustrating. You can't always get the angle you want when the camera is at a high angle. Now, it doesn't articulate to the side and it doesn't flip up to face the front. And that's something that might be a deal breaker for me. What I try to do with my videos is share with you my experience based on how I use the camera. And I can see that you might use it completely differently. So a practical example, I went to shoot some footage on a single handle gimbal, and the screen was pretty much blocked by the back motor. Also, if I want to use it underslung or if I'm walking around someone and I need the camera pointed sideways, I can't see the screen at all. Now, when I use my large rig, I'm always using an external monitor, so in that case, it's not a big issue. And I know I could attach an external monitor to my single handle gimbal, but the reason why I'm using it is because I want to use something smaller and more portable, so that would sort of defeat the purpose. It was also an issue for me when I was using it on a slider when I'm not always directly behind the camera. So for how I use this camera, that was a real pain point and it created friction. But if you don't plan on using these tools, or if you're just willing to always use an external monitor and deal with it, I totally get that. I would prefer that Sony just implemented a fully articulating touchscreen, charge me an extra $100, and we call it a day. Now let's get to the touchscreen. I said touchscreen-ish in the beginning because it is technically a touchscreen. You can use it to set focus points or to select a subject for autofocus, but that's it. You can't control the menu and you can't change settings, none of that. Again, I'm not sure why Sony would do this. The screen is clearly capable of detecting touch, and it seems like the next logical functionality. As far as the quality of the image on the LCD, it's fine. It's not great. It's definitely not as good as the A7R3 or the A9. It's a 922,000 dot display versus 1.44 million dot on the A7R3 and the A9. And something like the Canon EOS R, just as an example, has a 2.1 million dot LCD. The screen quality is not a deal breaker for me. I can make it pretty bright using the brightness setting, and I didn't really have issues with it as far as brightness goes. I just wish it was a little bit sharper. I also want to talk about other features that this camera has that may help you make a buying decision. First, I want to talk about image stabilization, and the A7 III does have in-body image stabilization. So we're not talking about digital image stabilization. We have a 5-axis sensor shift stabilization, meaning that the sensor is actually moving to compensate an offset camera movement. And Sony says that it can minimize the appearance of camera shake by up to 5 stops. Now, I didn't have a scientific way to measure this exactly. I'll just say that having shot on a lot of cameras and having a pretty good feel for what I should and shouldn't be able to do with my shutter speed, the image stabilization is noticeable. What's great here is that it lets you get image stabilization with lenses that don't offer optical image stabilization. So that's a huge bonus. Now for video, if you plan on shooting handheld, this is gonna be a big help because it's gonna reduce some of that shakiness. It's not as good as the GH5, but that's expected. The GH5 has a much smaller sensor and a larger body, so it would make sense that it'd be able to do a better job. Now, having said that, the image stabilization does make a difference, which, like I said, is noticeable for someone who shoots a lot with Canon. So here's a comparison of the A7 III and the Canon RP, which doesn't have in-body image stabilization. I almost never shoot handheld. I'm usually on a tripod, gimbal, or a slider, but I like to have an option to get another type of shot, so this is something that I'm happy to have. Next, I want to talk about time-lapse, and the A7 III does not do in-body time-lapse, and on top of that, it doesn't have a built-in intervalometer. And honestly, that's pretty disappointing to me, and I'm forced to use an external intervalometer every time I want to do a time-lapse. And this actually ties into the next thing I want to talk about, which is the Playmemories app. It's pretty basic, and you can control shooting mode, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and white balance for both photography and video. For stills, you can also control self-timer, continuous shooting settings, and there are some flash options. Now for video, you can adjust your frame rate, movie format, and you can start and stop recording. There's a bit of a lag, and it seems to buffer every so on, but if you're only using it to frame yourself, it'll work okay as a remote monitor and a remote control. What's disappointing is that you can't select or even see the focus zone. You have no idea what the camera is set to, and you can't change or select it. For what I would want to do, this makes the app pretty much useless. The only thing I can really see using it for is, again, framing myself for video and maybe doing macro photography so I can trigger the shutter without having to touch the camera, in which case I'd be focusing manual anyway, so it wouldn't really matter. On top of that, I could preview and transfer images to my phone, but not video. They were always grayed out. In my opinion, Sony needs to do better. We're talking about software here. It's not a significant ongoing expense. We don't need a ton of features, but autofocus control, time-lapse, and complete file transfer should just do it. Develop it once and then make everybody happy. The next set of features that I want to bring up have to do with audio. We have a mic input and a headphone jack, so I can use an external microphone to get much better audio, and I can also monitor the audio while recording. Another thing that is sometimes missing on other cameras is that the audio levels are always visible when you're in movie mode, and that just makes your life easier. So on some cameras, you have to go into the menu to both set and see your audio levels, but then when you go record, you can't see them on the screen, which isn't great. Okay, so I think the A7 III is one of my favorite cameras if I'm looking for one camera to do both photography and video. Well, actually, it's probably one of my favorite cameras, period. For a quick recap, it's Sony's entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera, but I'm super impressed by how powerful it is, and the image quality and functionality are superb. For photography, the image quality is so good. The autofocus is super fast and the eye detection is outstanding. For video, autofocus is definitely improved and I'm starting to like the extra level of control. I love how much I can customize the buttons, and I really did some work to get it to function exactly how I wanted to, so that I don't have to go into the menu very much. I get incredibly sharp and detailed 4K at up to 30 frames per second and Full HD or 1080p at up to 120 frames per second. And that lets me do slow motion at 4 times if I'm editing my video at 30 frames per second and up to 5 times if I edit my videos at 24 frames per second. The lenses are expensive, but the quality is definitely there, and you've got IBIS and dual SD card slots, although I did mention the card compatibility issues. The screen and the viewfinders are okay. They're not like what you get with the top of the line Sony cameras, but again, this is not the top of the line Sony cameras, and there have to be some differentiators. It's relatively small, and considering that it's a full frame sensor camera, and I really like the ability to shoot both at full frame and APS-C or Super 35, so I can maximize my focal length. The build quality seems pretty solid, and of course, the more I use it, the more I'll be able to give you feedback about that. Now, remote functionality using the app is pretty bad, and there's no built-in way to shoot time-lapse, which I really would have liked to see. The body alone sells for right under $2,000, and I think it's a very good value if you're looking for a full-frame sensor camera. We talked about the prices of the top-of-the-line Sony lenses. They aren't cheap, but they are excellent in terms of build quality, sharpness, and bokeh. This is the first video in this series, and I have several more coming to show you my favorite cinematic settings and low light settings. So if you're interested in learning more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you're notified when they're published. I'll put links in the description to the body as well as some of the lenses and accessories that I really like, because there are always specials and discounts, and those links are automatically updated with the lowest prices. I really hope I was able to give you a good overview of the Sony A7 III. If I did, please let me know by giving this video a thumbs up, tweet it, share it, and if you haven't yet, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. You can always find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk. And you know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.